Welcome to episode 31 of the SWNZ Podcast, the podcast for New Zealand Star Wars fans. My name is Matt.
And my name is Christy.
We'll get the ball rolling pretty promptly with a bit of a news roundup. I want to talk about current and upcoming Star Wars productions as we have been doing over the last few podcasts. There have been a couple of interviews with key people in upcoming Star Wars productions that have given us little tidbits of information, not a lot to really go on, but I still think it's worthwhile talking about in anticipation of more information coming out down the line. First up, Patty Jenkins, the director and showrunner for Rogue Squadron, which will be coming out in December of 2023, did a bit of an interview in which she discussed her relationship with Star Wars and her overall approach to the Rogue Squadron movie. There are a couple of key interesting points that came out of this interview. First and foremost, I think, is that she's got a number of projects on her plate at the moment, but Rogue Squadron is in fact her next project. So she says she's in love with all three projects that she has on her plate right now, and she's referring to Wonder Woman 3, a Cleopatra film, and Rogue Squadron. But she says, I'm definitely doing Rogue Squadron next, and I'm excited to do Wonder Woman 3. The Michael Stackpole books and the video games and all of the Rogue Squadron books, there's an incredible history that's really important to honour. That's a really interesting statement. The X-Wing books, the X-Wing series of novels that started off with Rogue Squadron came out a while ago now. They were written by Michael Stackpole and later Aaron Elston, who sadly passed away a few years ago now, are fan favourites. And they filled a really significant role in the expanded universe back in their time. And everyone is kind of wondering what their relationship to the Rogue Squadron movie will be. So she acknowledges the book, she acknowledges the history and their relevance, and there's going to be some sort of connection, if not, respect for the material that's come before. She goes on to say, and yet it must be brought to a new age because we have to tell a new story with it, and so you're trying to blend the best of everything and make it the great fighter pilot movie, which I've always wanted to make as well. It's a big brew of things that you're trying to put together and still keep to a simple story. We talked about how much we're looking forward to seeing Star Wars on the big screen again last month, and I think this acknowledgement of the existing Star Wars X-Wing military type novel material just heightens that anticipation.
Obviously, and amongst cinematic entries, Top Gun has probably sort of a legendary position as sort of one of the biggest and most popular fighter pilot movies out there. So, of course, with X-Wings, they can't take out real X-Wings and do dogfights. It's going to be largely computer generated or using sort of X-Wings that are superimposed against backgrounds. So it's not going to have that same sort of real world draw that the sometime to be released Top Gun sequel will be, but I'm really interested to see how they're going to sort of bring that dynamic sort of fight style. Obviously we see starfighter battles in Star Wars, but centering it solely on starfighter battles is going to be really interesting to see. And as she mentions the books that have come before, it'll be interesting to see if they pull out a few characters from those original novels and kind of put them in there, either as the maybe second tier, maybe even a lead character that we've seen before. Certainly we know that Lucasfilm is looking for fan favorite characters to pull back into the modern ones. We've seen Thrawn come in. Obviously they've brought Boba Fett back in sort of the adult interpretation of him that we last saw in Return of the Jedi. So it'll be interesting to see where that blend is, whether they simply reference it or whether they pull characters or planets or maybe even minor storylines from the original books.
The old novels were quite comprehensive ensemble casts in the comics for that matter. They changed over time, the key characters, the key players changed over time. So even if they don't draw directly on established characters, I think it's inevitable because of the variety of characters that are involved in the novels and comics that there'll be references and hints that come through. I think that's just an inevitability with this sort of ensemble cast and approach. So.
It keeps the fans happy. If you completely override something with no respect for the originals, it almost feels like a little bit of a slap in the face to fans that were really passionate about those books and those stories, even though we know that this new sort of modern era does in most part override the original older books and things from the expanded universe. But I do like when Lucasfilm tries to give us nods and things like that. Certainly they do love to pull in fan favorite characters like Cad Bane and Bad Batch and stuff like that. They know how much fans get a kick of that. And even little things like using the Camtono and the disintegrator rifle that we saw in, all sorts of older Star Wars, bringing them and putting them in the Mandalorian series. They know that fans get a kick out of little references and nods like that. So I'm hoping that Rogue Squadron, on top of being an awesome fighter pilot movie, has little nods as well.
So there's a couple of other things that we know about Rogue Squadron at this point. The writer was revealed earlier this month. The scriptwriter, it's Matthew Robinson, who is behind the movie The Invention of Lying and Love and Monsters. Don't know a lot about him beyond that, and I'm not quite sure how his previous material relates to Rogue Squadron, but that trivia is now known. There are unknowns about Rogue Squadron. We still don't have certainty about what era it is going to be set. There's a lot of conversation about it, this reference to the New Age, and it's not clear if they're talking about bringing old material, old approaches to Star Wars material into the New Age, or if they're straight up talking about post-Return of the Jedi or even sequel trilogy era of storytelling. So we don't have full clarity on that. That sort of terminology can be interpreted both ways.
Yeah, the X-Wings are kind of a common thread through a lot of Star Wars lore, because we saw that first teaser where she gets in a classic orange jumpsuit with an X-Wing there. So we obviously know it's...
That was a T-65, wasn't it, from memory, not a T-70. So my hope is we stick with the T-65s, the original trilogy era.
And I think by calling it Rogue Squadron, they know that casual moviegoers might be confused if it's not within a similar time frame to Rogue One, because there's going to be an association just by the name there.
Yeah, true.
So I'm hoping that it's in kind of the original Rebellion era rather than the sequels, or at least maybe like prior to New Hope, like with Rogue One, or even it could be during the Rebel Alliance of the original trilogy, though they might get a little tricky to exclude Leia and Luke and still tell the story. Or it could be interesting to sort of focus on some of the more background pilots and things during the Rebellion era, and they could reference, Commander Skywalker and things like that.
Okay, moving on. We were watching recently an interview that Ming-Na Wen did with Entertainment Tonight, where she talked a lot about her Fennec Shand character and the appearances in The Mandalorian, Bad Batch, and soon The Book of Boba Fett. It was really fun to see how effusive and passionate and enthusiastic she was about the Fennec Shand character. And one of the key things that I took away from that was she didn't really know how big the character would get initially. She loves the fact that Fennec Shand has become a bit of a fan favourite in many ways and had a recurring role, and to the point where it sounds a lot like she's not just going to be a secondary character, she's almost going to be a partner or an equal character in the Book of Boba Fett. She talked about working with Temuera Morrison and talked about his passion for Star Wars being a little bit toned down compared to her. She's very, very enthusiastic and excited about every sort of Star Wars bit of trivia. He's a little bit more keen on it being, he recognises the significance of the character, but is a little more keen on it just being, a good, secure job in some ways by the sound of things. So, I think the essence of that was that she didn't know how big the character was going to get. But she talked about, how that evolved, how the character actually ended up playing a much bigger role, and even let out the secret that she and Dave Filoni went to the same high school. They grew up in the same part of the country and went to the same high school, not at the same time, but they actually had a strong connection that meant they were able to have conversations and develop the character and work out where the character was going to go.
I like her telling the story of she's wanted to be in Star Wars for a long time. It's something she's obviously quite passionate about. She's obviously had a long-standing involvement with Disney, going back to being the original voice of Mulan for the animated series, and of course in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV series as well. So she's got a good standing with Disney, and talked about getting so excited when she finally got a part in Star Wars, but was almost disappointed that it was just for the one episode, that when she got booked for Fennec Shand, it was just for the one episode in the first season of The Mandalorian, and trying to convince the showrunners, going, maybe she's not dead, maybe you could see my hand twitching or something like that. Like, she was definitely pitching for this character to be more than just a one shot, and obviously her portrayal of the character and her enthusiasm for the character meant that, yes, that was not the end for Fennec, and we've seen how much more she's gotten, that now she's in 3 series and we're going to get merch of the character. And I think that that's really fun to see an actress being just so excited about their part in Star Wars to the point where they're pushing for the character to be involved in more.
So that was a 9-minute interview that we happened to watch, and it's actually kind of fun to watch. It's fun to see actors, we've said this before many times, enthusiastic about the roles they play. So we'll put a link to that down below. Go check it out if you want to follow up on that a little bit more. And wrapping up the production news roundup, we'll just talk about Leslie Headland again. She's the showrunner for the upcoming series, The Acolyte, which we know is set in the final days of the High Republic era, a period roughly 200 years before the events of Star Wars Episode 1. In a recent interview, she's done a couple of interviews in the last little while, but the most recent interview, she makes a couple of statements that I think are quite significant. She's previously referenced her passion for Star Wars, that it's been quite ongoing, that she, read and enjoyed the old Timothy Zahn novels that came out after the original trilogy, before the prequel trilogy. But she talks about having been tied up in the hype of Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, when it came out, and how much of a significant cultural event that was. And following on from that, in this recent interview, she makes the following statements. I was actually very intrigued by why George Lucas had started us at that particular point. I kind of wondered, but what happened to lead up to this? What happened to lead up to Star Wars Episode 1? That's kind of where my Star Wars fan brain went. How did we get here? And why are the Jedi like this? I think that particular statement, why are the Jedi like this, really frames where she's going to be going with the Acolyte. It's set before the events of the prequel trilogy, and we know where the Jedi and the Sith are at in the time of the prequel trilogy, but what got them to this point. Leslie goes on to say, when they are in power, why are they, the Jedi, acting this way? And how is it that they're not having the reaction that you would think they would to Anakin's presence and what Qui-Gon Jinn is saying about how passionately he feels about training him and bringing him into the fold? It's like even the discovery of Darth Maul is kind of met with, interesting kind of feeling. So I just think, for me, my brain was always buzzing around that idea and wondered what is going on here, or what has been going on to get them to that point. I think there's some really interesting material to explore, and I think that gives us quite a taste of the flavour of where the Acolyte's going to go in terms of storytelling.
Yeah, there's some really interesting points there. A lot of things in Star Wars we sort of take as given to us. I like the inquisitive mind that sort of thinks like, there's obviously quite a structure to the Jedi. And in episode 2, we see Yoda talking about that some of the Jedi are too sure of themselves, that there's almost like a sort of a complacency almost, that they are the ones in charge, that there's no sort of threat to their position of power. Because obviously we know what's coming up in episode 3, that there definitely is a very real threat to their position and their sort of established order. And also things like, like no attachments and no love. There's obviously some really set in stone rules that the Jedi follow that people and fans have sort of debated over the years about the positives and negatives of having such a rigid sort of set of rules imposed on human beings, people that are going to feel emotions and things like that, and whether that was the downfall of the Jedi, because see what happens to Anakin.
It was the rigidity of the rules that actually left Sidious with an opening to tempt Anakin to become Darth Vader, basically.
Yeah, so it would be interesting to really tackle some of those questions and obviously get a glimpse into that sort of era before we see the whole structure. Because we know for fans of Qui-Gon, that he would have been sort of established that he would have been on the Jedi Council had he not been sort of at odds with their strict rules, that he sort of argues with them and doesn't see eye to eye. So I like that not all of the Jedi take what is sort of written as complete authority, that there are some that have a different way of thinking, a different way of approaching the Force and the light side. So, of course, that means that there are going to be people on the opposite spectrum, people that are Force users that approach things from the dark side, or as Palpatine would say, you need to learn all of the aspects of the Force, dark and light, to know its full power. So there's so much there to dive into, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where the Acolyte series takes us.
The other big area of news that came through this morning relates to the Star Wars The Old Republic RPG game. It is the 10th anniversary of this game in December of this year. And so even if you're not a player of this game, I think it is worth talking about and sort of acknowledging that this body of content, this body of storytelling, frankly, exists. And we find it interesting because we play it, but I think it is interesting even if you don't play it, because, you know, obviously there haven't actually been many games or that you can say that you've been playing, you know, continuously for 10 years out there and that it's still supported to this extent. And part of the conversation about the 10th anniversary is that this is just the first 10 years. They've got a roadmap for the next couple of years. They'd love to see it go for another 10 years, and we'd love to see it go for another 10 years. So it is its 10th anniversary in December of 2021, and the news update that came out just this morning pertains to Game Update 7.0 that will be kicking off at the time of the anniversary, without a solid date yet, but during December likely. And that game update is going to be called Legacy of the Sith. They play on that a little bit because that abbreviates to LATS, lots of SWTOR, Star Wars The Old Republic. But the key things about this game update, there'll be 5 new levels, there'll be significant changes to the combat styles. They'll be going back to the planet Ming-Na Wen, which was first introduced in the KOTOR era. And they'll be moving into a new season for the Galactic Seasons story sort of component, or at least content component, which always includes it seems like it's always going to include a new companion. And the upcoming companion, interestingly, is a Duros who seems quite clearly to be inspired by Cad Bane. If you don't play this game, you know, in recent years it's been very accessible. They've moved it onto Steam. It's free to play initially. It's free to get in and play the story content. You've got nothing to lose in terms of giving it a bit of a try. It's designed to be able to run on, you know, moderate, low end to moderate PCs, so you don't actually need a high-end gaming machine. One of the consequences of that is not quite the graphical level of Jedi Fallen Order or Battlefront 2. It's intentionally designed to be able to run on a lower spec machine, so that they can have a significant player base. You know, that's one of the common features of a very broad, accessible MMO. But there has been a significant evolution of the sort of visual fidelity. The design has really been ramped up over the 10 years. They've gone to great lengths to not make it feel like a 10-year game. And that's one of the key themes that moving forward is they really want it to feel like it is being updated. So we're going to be seeing, you know, as well as new content, we're going to be seeing updates to the UI, underlying tech modernization and visual improvements, you know, as part of this coming up new, you know, update.
We've already seen them go through and update existing assets in the game, such as certain cutscenes that you see, particularly when traveling to planets. They went through and updated the graphics for that. And you see, especially with the new content, the characters, the details of the planets, and the new gear and cosmetic items in the game are all significantly sort of improved on the older original designs.
Yeah, all the costume, the textures for the costumes and so forth has really been dialed up by a number of levels. It's really got sort of dimensional, you know, qualities that it didn't have previously. There was previous updates. You know, if you've only seen the game very early on, it looks incredibly different. They did updates to the lip syncing and the facial rendering and so forth. But I'd really it sounds like they're going to be taking that even further, and I'm really keen to see. This was just a bit of a teaser, this information. It was a half-hour live stream earlier in the day, and they just announced what all the bullet point items that are going to be coming, and we're going to get more information about this over the next little while. One of the other main really big interesting updates was changes to the class structure. There's 8 classes, each with 2 advanced classes in the game, and the reason they structured it like that is because when you start the game, each class has its own story arc. So there's 8 different stories that you can play if you're just playing as a solo player. So you can play as a solo player as well as a group player. But each of the stories can be done is intended to be done just by yourself. And the consequence of that class system is that your play style and your combat style is locked into expectations for that character. They're taking away most of those restrictions, so that now all non-Force users will be able to use basically any type of weapon, dual blasters, rifles, assault cannons, and so forth. And similarly, Force users will be able to mix and match the type of Force skills that they have, that they're capable of. And there'll be some restrictions related to whether you're a light side player or a dark side player in terms of being able to use lightning and so forth. But that's quite a significant development. It lets you really customize your character and your playstyle in a way that you haven't been able to previously.
One particular small component that they actually touched on is that back when they originally launched the game, there is a bounty hunter class, so you can play as a bounty hunter. And obviously with The Mandalorian now, a lot of people like to dress up their in-game bounty hunters like The Mandalorian. In fact, there is gear that is heavily inspired by different Mandalorian characters, and of course his classic disintegrator rifle. Now, when they designed the game all those years ago, the bounty hunters use blaster pistols. They don't use rifles. And of course now everyone wants to dress up their bounty hunter to look like the Mandalorian using the rifle, which they haven't been able to do. By breaking these restrictions, you can now play a bounty hunter with a rifle, a sniper rifle, 1 or 2 blasters, or even an assault cannon if you really wanted to when this update goes live. So it really does give a huge gameplay implication that you can, and it sounds like we'll be given loadout, so you can switch around depending on your mood or what mode. Like if you like using a sniper rifle in PvP, but you prefer to use blaster pistols in operations, it sounds like we'll be able to mix and match. So you'll be able to have quite a variety of both cosmetic and gameplay features with this change. So I'm really quite intrigued. They say that they're going to put the Jedi Guardian on the PTS in a week. So we will get our first hands-on look at how this new system is going to affect one specific class. With the Jedi Guardian, the Jedi classes can use one single lightsaber, 2 sabers like Ahsoka Tano, or a double-bladed lightsaber like Darth Maul. So we're going to see how that works in a week, and that's going to be really, really exciting. But I just love how excited the development team are about this new expansion. This is so much work to put in. I was expecting more story and maybe some cosmetic updates and just sort of a big sort of fan celebration of hitting that 10-year anniversary. This feels like a massive amount of work that they are putting into the game to keep it playable, because for legacy players like us, we have been playing since day one, so we've played the story of all the 8 classes, and so I feel like this is giving people a real fresh way to go back and play all that original story yet again with more there's almost you can do almost unlimitless characters because there's so much to do in different play styles, different advanced classes, but this is yet another layer of playing through 10 years worth of storytelling from the start again and playing around with the new playstyles. And this is just so exciting to me as a player. And lots of people are buzzing about the options that this gives us for our characters, because you do get really quite attached to the characters that you play, controlling all the different looks, down to storyline choices, light side, dark side choices. It's going to be really, really fun. And it's definitely worth checking out.
Yes, I know we run the risk of over talking about Star Wars The Old Republic because we like it so much, but we like all the video games. We've tried a bit of Jedi Fallen Order, Squadrons. We've played a lot of Battlefront, but I think it's fair to say nothing has the sort of staying power, the uninterrupted ongoing maintenance and accessibility of Star Wars The Old Republic.
And it is worth noting that this is nearly 10 years worth of Star Wars stories, that there are tie-in novels, tie-in comics. We're seeing merchandise like action figures in that pulling from it. And it really is alongside the books and comics with just how much storytelling there is and major characters. And
the story is not just written for the sake of gameplay. The story is written by the authors of the novels. They're written by professional expert storytellers. So it is an actual story, not just an add-on to gameplay.
If you're a fan of Darth Revan and the original KOTOR games, you definitely have to play this game. It really continues Revan's story and a lot of the surrounding sort of characters and the lore, and it just the new storyline in the most recent expansions where without giving too much away, the character of Valkorion is a really, really fun storyline and really sort of explores things like sort of using the Force to sustain your life. I'll just put it like that. It's really interesting for just the lore of Star Wars, the underlying sort of what you can really do with the Force.
Yeah,
and I think it's really fun.
Just for a frame of reference to reiterate, if you're not familiar, it's set thousands of years before the original trilogy era, in contrast to the New High Republic material, which is set hundreds of years before the original trilogy era. So that's just useful context. Okay, product announcements and store reports. Just a small handful of these this past week, but it's worth, it's always fun to talk about things that have been announced that we've seen in the last little while. None of these are available in New Zealand just yet, but they're all upcoming. New products, new Lego products were announced at LegoCon. 3 new sets, an Imperial Armoured Marauder. This is basically the heavy version of the troop transport that was seen in The Mandalorian. 478 pieces, comes with Grief Karga, 2 stormtroopers, and that's due out in a couple of months' time. Boba Fett's Starship, Slave 1, 593 pieces, comes with Boba Fett, Mandalorian version of Boba Fett no less, with a blaster, and the Mandalorian with his blaster rifle and a Beskar spear, plus a carbonite brick. And also finally a Imperial Light Cruiser, also from the Mandalorian, 1,336 pieces, features minifigs of Cara Dune, Fennec Shand, Moff Gideon, a Dark Trooper, plus a Lego version of the Child. With the start of the month just rolling over, we've had announcements of what to expect from New Zealand Mint if you're into collecting New Zealand Mint silver coins. We've got continuation of existing lines such as a Sith Trooper being added to the Guards of the Empire silver coin line. We're expecting to see at least one more chibi character. They showed off the silhouettes of that. I've got a sneaking suspicion we might see the Mandalorian. It'll be the first non-original trilogy character we've seen in the chibi line. I could be proven wrong, but that's my guess at this point. And interestingly, coming up later in the month, there's a Millennium Falcon shaped coin. So a 1 ounce silver coin. Sounds like it's actually basically a little version, a little sculpted version of the Millennium Falcon. And finally, a very fun new statue from Kotobukiya, aka Artifacts in the US. A new style of statue, animated style, kind of based on the Return of the Jedi Ewok versus Walker scenes. This is a cartoon stylized version of a bunch of Ewoks attacking a AT-ST Walker, and I think it's super cool. It's a very, very three-dimensional sculpt with Ewoks attacking the Walker from all angles. Cartoon Ewoks. All the Ewoks are known named characters with all their appropriate details there.
The animation style reminds me of the Gentle Giant animated maquettes, with a sort of a soft stylized but still very detailed design style. And of course with Kotobukiya, this is going to be more of a plastic one, so you won't have quite the hefty price point of a very detailed polystone statue, because this is incredibly detailed. There looks like there's about 10, maybe more Ewoks on this thing, and each, as you say, has their appropriate character details, as well as a full sculpted base and a full AT-ST. Something like that in polystone would be very, very expensive in this modern era. So it's fun to see a different kind of product and different style coming from Kotobukiya.
Yeah, that's a key point that's worth reiterating. Kotobukiya Artifacts, they do products made out of plastic as compared to Gentle Giant, who make the resin, the polystone replicas. So there's differences in the price point and the weight.
If you haven't bought Kotobukiya products in a while, I know some years ago they did a lot of larger scale statues. In the modern era, they seem to be doing slightly smaller ones, but their modern stuff is incredibly finely detailed. I picked up the Rey Descendant of Light statue, which is done in sort of a stylized fashion, and the paint application on it is beautiful,
pristine, and
they snap together very, very cleanly. So it isn't like a one piece. Well, no, I'm not sure with this one, but most of their pieces are technically kit set, that they come in pieces and you snap them together, so you get very, very crisp and detail lines and paint application, because there isn't any sort of bleed over with the paint. They're not trying to paint in tiny crevices, because each individual thing is crafted, painted, and then they all snap together, and it's seamless. There is no hint of where the joins are when it's all put together. They are really, really fantastically made.
So we love Kotobukiya products, as you can probably tell. They come out of Japan. They've got some really fine detailing and really cool artistic styles to them. That product is available for pre-order from Sideshow Collectibles at this point, so importing it from the US basically, but hopefully we'll see it locally as well. Alrighty, Bad Batch Episode 9, Bounty Lost, which screened last week. We start the episode with Omega having been captured by Cad Bane. Bad Batch are chasing Cad Bane. During that process, they learn from Tech that Omega is the unmodified replication of Jango Fett, making her the only available source for fresh cloning material. Cad Bane is taking Omega to a Kaminoan cloning facility, an abandoned cloning facility, to deliver her to the Kaminoans. Omega, by way of tricking Todo, Bane's droid, manages to get out and signal Bad Batch so they become aware of her location. Lama Su sends Tornwi, interestingly voiced by Rena Owen, to retrieve Omega, and orders Nala Se to eliminate the girl after extracting genetic samples from her. In a bit of a surprise twist, we see the reappearance of Fennec Shand coming to rescue, or at least reacquire, Omega from Cad Bane, and that kind of clarifies the fact that there are two factions within the Kaminoans that are trying to acquire Omega, basically. One that has hired Cad Bane and one that has hired Fennec Shand. Tornwi unfortunately meets her ultimate fate, dies, so I guess that means we're not going to see Rena Owen portraying Tornwi again. A little bit of a shame, but it was interesting for a brief moment to see both Rena Owen and Michelle Ang in the same episode at the same time. And the episode concludes, basically, just to cut a long story short, with Omega escaping and being retrieved by the Bad Batch, sort of tying things up fairly loosely for the next episode tonight.
This was another one where we don't see character development in quite the same way, but a lot of story development. We know why the Kaminoans want Omega. We find out more about her origins, that she is essentially the secret sister of Boba Fett, as I have seen some people refer. They seem to be going after Omega because they can't find Boba Fett, because he would also have the same genetic structure that would allow them to make fresh clones, but he has obviously gone underground, or they can't find him in this era, because we don't know, we haven't seen him referenced before in this
certainly from the point of view of the players in the story, they don't know where he is.
Yeah, so, but they do know where Omega is, so that's really, really interesting that someone in the Kaminoan hierarchy decided that they wanted to kind of mess around and create a we presume without any other significant alterations, because their main rationale for pursuing her is just that unaltered Jango Fett genetic material. And it's interesting that whether that was done by Nala Se as a secret project, or whether it was done just because they were experimenting.
Just a backup copy.
Yeah. It's interesting because obviously Nala Se has quite a attachment to Omega, to the point of hiring Fennec Shand to basically intercept the other Kaminoan's bounty hunter, because they're basically, they both want to capture Omega, but the Kaminoans will basically capture her, take what they need, and then terminate her. And then Nala Se wants to rescue her away, despite them being sort of kind of on the same side. So it's kind of interesting to see that sort of fracture between sort of the...
And as far as we can tell, they don't know. The different Kaminoan factions aren't actually... Well, I guess Nala Se is aware that there's an ulterior motive, that she's trying to rescue Omega, but the converse isn't true. Prime Minister Lama Su does not know.
And I think it's interesting because Nala Se's goal is to keep Omega alive. So she does pay out to Fennec Shand, because while Fennec Shand doesn't capture Omega by intercepting Cad Bane and stopping Cad Bane from taking Omega back to the Kaminoans, she did pretty much complete the mission by rescuing Omega from the hands of Cad Bane. So she does get paid out. So we don't know if that's going to be the end of Fennec Shand and Cad Bane's sort of adventures within the Bad Batch series. I do really enjoy seeing the early years of Fennec Shand. Earlier we talked about Ming-Na Wen's interview, and she talked about that they had talked at great length about sort of Fennec Shand. This is 20 plus years before we see her in The Mandalorian, and how she would be different because she's more raw, she's more fresh, because they say that she's
establish her reputation, which is kind of what we'd expect. But.
Yeah, so that's interesting that they even delved into how different is she as a young beginner bounty hunter that's got to prove herself against seasoned professionals. And she goes up against Cad Bane, who has kind of a legend around him, and she actually succeeds and stops Cad Bane from capturing Omega. So she's pretty young, but she really proved herself, which reflects on how we see her in The Mandalorian. We know that she, even at a young age, is on par with seasoned bounty hunters. So that kind of adds to her coolness as we see her in The Mandalorian. So I'm really excited to see how that even progresses into the Book of Boba Fett series, knowing more about her backstory and her relationship with, she's obviously had some interactions with clones, and whether that will be touched on in any way, because obviously Boba Fett is a clone. So it'll be interesting to see whether that comes up at any point. But I thought it was kind of an exciting episode. A lot of action, a lot of sort of combat, trying to sort of one-up each other, because obviously we've got two bounty hunters fighting over Omega, but then we have the Bad Batch in the mix as well. So it's all sort of fighting. They're all trying to sort of achieve different things. Everyone's trying to grab Omega. The Bad Batch want her because she's part of their family, and they don't exactly know why Fennec Shand is trying to sort of get Omega or intercept her. They don't know that technically they're wanting the same thing. They want Omega safe, though obviously Fennec Shand has been paid to sort of take her back to Nala Se, and they want to keep her with them. But it was really interesting to see how it all, and I was kind of sad to see Tornwee die. She seems like
fairly abruptly and without a lot of fanfare, but yeah.
But yes, it was. She's not a large character in episode 2, so it wasn't like a huge gut punch. And technically, she's on the side of the Kaminoans that wants to kill Omega. So I guess it's not. It's not the worst thing. But I was very excited to see that they brought back Rena Owen to voice her, even though it was a few lines of dialogue. As some of you may know, Omega is voiced by Michelle Ang, who recently worked on a locally filmed series with Rena Owen. So there's a possibility that they collabed or recorded their dialogue in the same studio or something like that. Like, I think that was fun that they've worked together personally together in New Zealand, and they got to do voices together in a Star Wars episode as well. So I think that's fun. More New Zealanders getting to participate in the Star Wars galaxy is always exciting.
Yeah, so as you say, it was a very action-packed episode, and as we said in previous conversations, things are moving quite rapidly in this. There's obviously an overarching plot that will be resolved with time, but each episode, a lot happens, things happen, so we're not left with just, things are definitely happening and moving along, and that's making the whole story quite engaging.
It would be interesting to know how much Bad Batch has kind of figured out that the Kaminoans want her genetic material, because you'd almost wonder if they were able to, with Tech's help, extracting some sort of DNA samples and then just like mail it to the Kaminoans, whether that would just like get them off her back so that they can run off and that they're not going to bother them anymore, or whether they're still a little bit in the dark about the Kaminoans' true desire for why they want her. So it'll be interesting to see whether that will get played on. We didn't get a lot of the Imperial storyline with Crosshair. Obviously he was quite badly injured in the previous one, so I'm thinking that might come up in a future episode, whether the Imperials get frustrated that Cad Bane was not able to successfully retrieve Omega, whether Crosshair's got like a real score to settle and is going to go after them, or, like either out of vengeance or some sort of soldier's duty to finish the mission, being a good soldier following orders. But it's really exciting because I don't know where they're going to quite go from this, how they're going to resolve this conflict.
Yeah, so that episode concluded with them on board the Marauder. They're not on a planet at this point. Basically, the story's back to a clean slate sort of state. So I expect that we're going to see, just the beginning of a new story arc in some ways with the upcoming episode, visiting a new planet, starting a new mission or such like. So, yeah, like I say, another new episode. We're looking forward to it. We'll be talking about it next week. But for now, that's about it for today's installment. I guess we are done doing talking. Thank you for tuning in. We appreciate you taking your time to listen to us share our passion for Star Wars. We do enjoy just talking about Star Wars. Stay tuned to our website, SWNZ.co.nz, for Star Wars news for New Zealanders and another podcast episode next week and every Friday. Don't forget you can jump on over to either our Facebook group or the SWNZ message boards to discuss all the latest Star Wars news with other Kiwi fans. Thank you for listening.
And may the Force be with you.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, go ahead and like the video, check out the SWNZ Podcast playlist for our other episodes, and subscribe for alerts about new episodes. See you next time.